morning and welcome to the Ozoza Lifestyle Book Club. Today we are honored to have Mamle Wolo with us, who will be discussing the themes in her book, Kaya Girl, and discussing bridging socio-economic disparities. Mamle Wolo is a Ghanaian German writer, born in Ghana and grew up in Ghana and the UK. She attended University Primary School at Legon and Achimota Secondary School. She holds an MA in Modern Languages and an MPhil in Latin American Studies from the University of Cambridge, as well as an MA in Creative Writing from the University of Lancaster. In 2011, she won the Burt Award in Ghana for her children's novel, The Kaya Girl, which we'll be discussing today. Much inspiration for the novel came from her work as a consultant in social development in Ghana. Her next children's novel, Flying Through Water, will be published in 2023, and we're very much looking forward to reading that. Welcome, Mamle Wolo. So nice to have you with us on our book club.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So just to let you know, I absolutely adored this book. I was reading it in the evenings to my daughter, and both of us just were actually fighting over the book after a while.
Perfect. That makes it all worthwhile, I tell you.
and it was wonderful on many different levels. I mean, the story itself, which we'll get to, but also inspiring confidence and pride in one's culture and heritage. Like a lot of young children I know who read it, friends of mine's kids who read it, have run around harassing their moms to get gillies and putting on the gilly and taking pictures of themselves. And so they really saw sort of heroines and heroes and wanted to copy and emulate those characters. And I found that fantastic, really, because I haven't really come across that with many children's novels in this African context that's very inspiring for children. Yeah, so the first question I'd like to start with is, what made you write this story about a friendship between a girl from a privileged background and a girl who carries the load of customers in the market?
So before I answer the first question, I'd just like to respond to some of the things you said. I am so touched to hear about the response of children who take pride in the African culture after reading the book. For me, that's something I didn't even foresee. And it's really humbling to hear that, and it's very motivational as well. So thank you for that feedback. We writers often don't consider ourselves writers the same way that our readers do, because it's not an easy ready-made identity. So when you hear about reactions like that, you really do feel like a writer. That's really one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard about a reaction to this book. Many different things made me write the story, really very many, but I would say that the sort of major trigger that made me write it, made me actually begin to put it into words, was hearing about the Burt Award, because as I just mentioned, there is no ready-made path to becoming a writer. It's not an easy career to take up. There are no ready-made rewards. Most of the time you have to do a lot of other things at the same time. I wasn't actually originally intending to write for children, although I always thought I might at some point. But when I heard about the Burt Award, the first prize for the Burt Award was $10,000. And at that time I thought, well, if I could win that, it would really help me to find time to work on all my writing. Elizabeth Irene Beatty won the Burt Award with her novel, The 12th Heart, in the first year that it was run in Ghana, which must have been 2010, either 29 and 2010, I think it's 2010. So Elizabeth Irene Beatty, who's a good friend and a wonderful writer, won it, and she told me about it. And she said, well, try your luck, who knows, And at first I thought, well, I didn't know if I wanted to take that much time off my other writing projects, which were not children's writing projects, but in the end, I decided to do it. And so I'd say that knowing that there was a prize attached to it was what actually gave me the push to do it. That was the main push. But as soon as I started writing it, a lot of things came into play, which could certainly also be relevant as reasons why I wrote it, such as my frustration during the course of many years of fieldwork at seeing so much intellect and talent go untapped among children who don't have equal access to education. So that came into play, and I wanted to explore that through the book, and I wanted to also explore what that meant in a country where we do have many children who do have the opportunity to have education. So yeah, so these are some of the factors that made me write this book.
Yes, no, that's really interesting. I think the other thing that came to mind is, what do you think attracted the characters to each other? So what do you think attracted Faiza, who's the Kaya girl from northern Ghana, working in the market in Makola market in Accra, to Abina, who's the privileged girl?
Faiza and Abna, I think they are just girls who share certain character traits. Well, first of all, they were age mates. They were both girls who were out of their comfort zone at the time that they met. Abna had just started spending her summer holiday with her aunt. And so she was kind of uprooted, and Faiza had just come down from the north. So they're both uprooted, and they're both kind of looking for a foothold. And I think that's one of the things that attracted them to each other. And then also they're both very smart girls who are curious about the world around them beyond what is sort of in their immediate grasp. And I think that was also a very significant thing that attracted them to each other, that they were both keen to learn about things that were outside of their worlds. And so I think there is a sort of, I don't know whether to call it telepathy or what, but when somebody is, when two people kind of find a camaraderie or a common spark or a kindred sort of friendship, it's something that's fairly sort of natural and immediate. And because I have found, for example, I've done fieldwork in all regions of Ghana over my career, and I've bonded with people in the course of one interview, often within 10 minutes, over commonalities. There are so many things that divide us, but there are also so many really fundamental things that unite us. So I can bond with women because we are women and we go through similar challenges, even though our lives are very different and we've grown up speaking different languages, we've grown up in different economic circumstances, we've grown up in even different cultures within the same country. Those fundamental commonalities can really bond people. And I think that's what happened with Abna and Faiza, that they had commonalities which were very strong, such as the fact that they were both outside of the comfort zones, both looking for a foothold. And they were both very smart girls who were interested in the world beyond their immediate scope. And so they found those things in each other.
That's really interesting and fascinating. And I completely agree with what you said about we have a lot of commonalities and we should actually work on strengthening those. One thing I found particularly interesting about what you've just said is this element of curiosity that these two characters had, this willingness to explore things beyond their immediate sphere. I'm questioning, as you were talking, I was thinking, I wonder what part of their nurturing triggered that curiosity. Because I feel like perhaps that curiosity is not something that requires any kind of material investment, or it's not an economic thing. And if we can actually all try and be alert to that as in our communities of nurturing curiosity in children about everything. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think that's a very insightful question, and it's a complex one too. I think if you look at, say, 5 members of the same family, you might find that some of them have that and some don't have that. So I think to some extent it's just in people's makeup, and then I think it's also in people's influences. So one thing that I have noticed in Ghana, especially among men, is that men who've been raised by their grandmothers often become men who go far in life. And I think especially in the more challenging economic contexts, when children are raised by their grandmothers, often they get, in some ways, they get a better deal. I mean, I'm not advocating that children should not be raised by their mothers, but often when in financially challenging circumstances, especially maybe if the family is not all together, the mother often has to go out and look for financial means. And the mother's attention is very much divided between all these different challenges. Moreover, the mother is often young and she doesn't have the same experience that her mother has. And so often children who are raised by their grandmothers, I have found, it's just something I've noticed, and I think someone should do research on it. They are more inquiring, they are brought up in a calmer way. They're raised by a more mature person, basically, who has more time for them and more empathy and perhaps more compassion. So that's one thing I've noticed. So I think that in every environment, you can identify influencers who don't necessarily have to come from outside. There are influencers who may be within the family context or within the immediate community context, but the particular set of circumstances that brings about them being in the position to influence that child is what can make that child perhaps different or more inquiring than a child who maybe was raised by the mother or who wasn't raised by that particular individual. So that's the kind of thing that I think can make the difference. A teacher can also make a huge difference in a person's life. I know many people who've been influenced by particular teachers to become interested in particular things, you know. So yes, I'd say influencers, and then, yeah, just people's characters.
Yeah, well, absolutely, I agree with that. It's actually quite interesting that to actually look at the patterns that are, if one can form patterns in this output of these curious minds, but it's quite fascinating.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed the characters, and I wonder what you think they taught each other.
I think they primarily taught each other about each other's cultures, about each other's backgrounds. They taught each other about the complexity of living in a nation which really is still quite young. They taught each other things that, you know, much older people don't stop and think about, which is, what is Ghana? What is a nation? You know, why is it that there are these kinds of divisions and prejudices and so on? What happens when, you know, one of the legacies of colonialism is that different ethnic groups get thrown together inside a boundary that is given a name and is only a few decades old, really. Where is the mutual understanding, the belonging and so on supposed to come from? It's something that we have to recognize and we have to buy into and commit to. And if we don't, then we get those kinds of divisions. So I think that's one of the things that they taught each other, simply by making each other aware of the different worlds from which they came within the same country. And that was a surprise to both of them. But they taught each other so much just by telling each other about their home lives and about where they were coming from, about what they did, and noticing the contrasts and working through them.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of one answer to that. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the parts of the books that I really enjoyed, I remember discussing. What I liked about the book is that sometimes children read a lot of fiction, which is wonderful. You know, fiction is great, and this is also fiction. But I like that there were lots of social issues that the book brought up that the child would now start asking you about, and as a result, start learning about socio-economic environments, which I think is very important. Because day-to-day
certainly
that may not come up unless you're really actively engaged in
absolutely
projects. And one of the things I liked was, and I thought it was very well expressed in the book, the discomfort that Abena felt with some of her quite superficial issues when she now started to compare, when she had perspective, and that she was hearing Pfizer's sort of more survival issues, you know, early marriage issues, you know, fleeing from northern Ghana to make a living and the stress. And then she suddenly realized that in her own sort of middle class world, you know, wanting to redecorate your room or some kind of thing that you worried about was just so insignificant. You know?
Barbies or brats.
Yeah, you know, I love that, because that is key. And that is really, I really thought there was a poignant moment like that where I just thought, this is it. This is really what we need to highlight, you know, in different ways for different demographics, but it's really just different perspectives. You know, everything is relevant. And really, in the big scheme of things, is that really important? No. What's important?
Yes.
Food, shelter, education.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yes, and I think this is one of the great rewards that I have reaped from writing for children, is that this happens, and this is not something that would happen if this were not a children's book. So this dialogue happens between, say, you and your daughter, because your daughter starts to ask questions because those questions are sparked in her mind, and you have read the book too, and you've enjoyed the book too. And so you can have that debate, which I think is really critical. And for me, that is one of the great rewards of having written a book that can be read by across generations. Although I still primarily consider myself to be a writer for adults, I really treasure that, and I value that very much. And also because one of my main areas of work in social development is education, especially at the basic level. To me, these processes are critical. So yes, that sort of stop and think, that sort of aha moment where a privileged girl, a girl from a privileged background recognizes that she is privileged, you know, because if you're constantly surrounded with people who are equally or more privileged, you don't see yourself as privileged. You might even see yourself as less privileged. Yeah. So now you have a contrast, which is something different from anything you've ever been close to before. Because it's not that she would never have seen people who are poorer than her. She would have, but by becoming friends and connecting directly with a girl like Faiza, these issues now become so real to her that she wants to find out more, and she starts to question her own life. So for me, that was very critical, because I see these contrasts so much in my work, and but then connecting with people from all kinds of backgrounds has taught me so much about these contrasts. I mean, I'm telling you, my first few field trips, I think it was more of an education than everything that had gone before, you know. So that was kind of the thing I was trying to get across, and so I'm glad if I was able to.
I mean, I think one of the important things which you said, which us as human beings in the same human condition need to also maybe put more importance to, is the concept of connection, just connecting with people. Because I think it's when you connect with people that you can really relate to what they're going through. But a lot of the time, whether it's, you know, media or communities, there's a lot of talk that is about disconnection. We are different, there's disconnection, this is how they do it, we do it this way, look at all the judgment, and that is all about disconnection. You know, and I think there does need to be more focus on the commonalities and the fact that actually we're all human beings who have the same needs, and there are being convinced that there are points of connection. You just have to find them. And I think once that comes in, then you have everybody relating to the person's issues and wanting to somehow, you know, promote positive change within their own sphere of influence.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, I think connecting across barriers is something that's possible for most people. I mean, you put two babies together wherever they come from and they can communicate, you know. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I myself am the result of a mixed race union. My father is Ghanaian, my father was Ghanaian, and my mother is German. So I think that humanity and those commonalities that are there, no matter what our backgrounds, I think they're just powerful, like plug points, if you like, you know. Yes. Yeah, which I wanted to show in the book, that they can lead to all kinds of possibilities.
What would you say the underlying message of the book?
I don't think I had one single underlying message, but I know that when I decided to write it and I started writing it, it was almost like a ready-made sort of receptacle for many things that had occupied me, that I had reflected over and had concerned me over the years of my work. One of the things that I think I'll carry to my grave is the sort of frustration and heartbreak of speaking to children who are really bright and talented and hopeful, and knowing that it will take a miracle for them to be able to develop those talents and that intellect that they have, and that the much greater possibility is that they will never be able to do those things. And especially girls. After all, most of our culture is patriarchal here in Ghana and in West Africa, is deeply patriarchal when it comes to things like girls' education. And I'm not saying that it's patriarchal in every respect, but when it comes to things like that, girls having an equal chance at secular education, the patriarchy of our culture, our cultures, greatly undermines girls' opportunities. And girls are more than half of the population. And so I think that we always talk about brain drain in the context of people who are educated, going abroad and using their talents abroad and so on. But by far the bigger brain drain is happening to children. I watch it in my work, and it's part of what triggered me to write this book, that there is an astronomical brain drain going on in childhood. There are many children who still don't even get the chance to go to school, despite all our education policies. And even among those who do go to school, because cultural factors are so stacked against them, even girls who are able to get to, say, the end of junior high and so on, many of them will end up not using their education. And also because our culture is still it still prioritizes marriage and childbearing so much more over anything else that a woman can do, almost across the board, even among the most educated sectors of the population. If a woman does not have children, she's not a wife, she's not a missus, there is so much cultural stigma attached to that. There's nothing else she can do that will give her that type of prestige. And so that type of pressure, especially among the women who don't have access to, easy opportunities to become educated, to become professionals, it basically crushes the type of potential that could have led to them having a career in anything other than wifehood and motherhood. And these are some of the things that really were on my heart as I wrote that book. And that was also why Pfizer had to be female, because to me, it's not just this brain drain that I'm talking about affects both males and females, but it is far worse for females. And I think it's something that I would love people to talk about much more, because I don't think people are not aware of it. I think it's just not being talked about and recognized.
Yeah, interesting. We're wondering whether people feel that there's nothing that can be done about it. I'm wanting to see whether the lack of dialogue and discourse on this topic comes from. Is it a sense of helplessness? Is it a sense of futility? It'll be interesting to actually examine where that comes from and challenge that.
I think it depends on who you're talking about, really, in terms of the will. I think it depends on who you're talking about and which levels of society you're talking about. I think among individuals, let's say, everybody can do something small, but I think if you look at the big picture in our nation, we need more political will to tackle these issues. And also, I think really education, for me, education is kind of the answer to every question, because once people are educated, you don't really need to do much else, because people come to those conclusions themselves. It's already been shown statistically again and again that women who reach a certain level of education are going to reduce the number of children that they have, which will then give them greater opportunities to engage in education and professional careers. So I think education is the bottom line. And as long as it's not there, as long as people do not have equal educational opportunities, and especially girls have these huge barriers to education stacked against them, things will not change.
Yes. What does the term Kayai originate from, the term, just for our viewers who are not familiar with this concept?
Kaya is a Hausa word which means load. And so the load that porters carry in the markets, that is the Kaya. And then Yo is just a word for woman or girl in Dangme languages, in Ga and Dangme. So it's actually a mongrel of a word, because it's a word that it's a compound word made from two languages, which I think in itself also says quite a lot about its sort of cultural origins. But that's the origin of the word. I think the word kaya is used in the markets like just to mean load carrier and porter. And then the kaya yo, the phenomenon of girls migrating to do this particular form of unskilled labor, I've been told goes back to the mid-90s, when there was civil conflict in the north of Ghana. And the civil conflict triggered migration patterns, which led to the establishment of communities in Accra from particular parts of northern Ghana. And once those communities became established, a migratory flow began. And the flow of girls points to many things. It points to what I said before about the lack of educational opportunities, particularly for girls. And also in those areas where they come from, there is still a fairly high prevalence of a kinship fostering system, whereby girls are given for life really to their paternal aunts, the way that Pfizer was given to her aunt in the novel. So girls are given to their paternal aunts, and the paternal aunts then are in charge of them, and they will make decisions about their marriages and so on when the time comes. Yes. But under the tradition, and this predates secular education, of course, when the girl is given in this way, she's expected to help her aunt in the household. And she's expected to help to look after the aunt's children and to help with household tasks. And so once secular and formal education came into the picture, often these girls are not sent to school because they have a role to play in the household demography. Yeah. And so traditionally, this leads to very low statistics for girls' education in those areas where that practice is still common. And many of the girls who come to do this type of unskilled labor in the markets come from those areas. And so it points to, the triggers are these lack of educational opportunities for these girls, and then the existence of migratory sort of settlements in Accra, which can receive such migrants, not in any kind of very safe or secure or luxurious way, but many of them have some point of contact to come to. And then the whole sort of system that has been established in the markets, whereby many of these girls will actually sleep in empty shops or hairdressers kiosks and things at night. They'll get together in groups, and they will pay some nominal fee to the owner of the kiosk or the room or the shop, and they will spend the night there. So there are these systems. Some of them sleep on the pavements. I remember seeing them outside the pavements of the Movenpick Hotel, which makes for an extremely interesting contrast, these are some of the push factors behind this Kaya youth phenomenon.
It's interesting to see that there's a link in terms of there's connections they have in, say, Kumasi or Accra that they can. So I was thinking, okay, they just leave, and I just kind of. But there's obviously, it makes sense that there's a connection. There's a sort of a recipient at the other end. I was also wondering where they get the funds from to travel. Is it that they just find their way and hop a hitch a ride here, hitch a ride there?
Yes, I mean, remember, I haven't actually studied Kaya formally, but from things that I heard, I think many girls who come from the communities where people migrate for this type of labor, they are used to engaging in certain income generating activities together with their mothers and their aunts and the women in the communities, such as the production of shea butter and sometimes of soap, and they farm and they get, maybe some surplus money from their farming. They farm vegetables. So they may be able to save money from such activities. Some of them do go with the knowledge of their parents and their families, so they may be able to get money from them. So yes, I think those are some of the ways in which they get money. But another thing I've heard, and this doesn't just apply to, out of Accra, is that often children are carried free on public transport. I've heard this before, especially younger children or children under 10. I've heard often that children are able to get onto public vehicles and they are not charged. So, I mean, I don't have any hard data about this, but I've just heard it from a few people. So maybe some of that goes on as well. I don't know.
So people are born into, as we mentioned earlier, into varying circumstances. What advice would you give to people born into privileged circumstances and their parents and communities in terms of bridging socioeconomic gaps?
Well, I think, first of all, people must want to. So the advice is for those who are inclined to do so. It's not always easy, I think, but yes, everybody can, if they really want to, find certain ways to do it. One thing that I did after some of my work in the North, which really brought me into contact with children who had not been educated and who were in complementary education programs trying to, let's say, fast track literacy in the mother tongue. Those kinds of programs, like from the School for Life in the north of Ghana. When I came back from a particular field trip in 2008, because I had found out that many of the children who attended those courses, they learned how to read and write very effectively after 9 months because they were studying their mother tongues, but many of them were not able to make the transition to formal schools because their families did not want them to go because they needed their labor, or they weren't willing to pay for the uniforms and things like that, because those programs usually don't need uniforms, and then they provide the reading materials and stuff. So transitioning to formal school, means that you may not be available to work with the family, and B, that they may need to buy you a few things like pens and pencils. And so some were not able to make the transition. And I found that really a shame, because they had learned how to read and write and how to do basic arithmetic. So when I came home, I actually asked some friends to help me raise some money. And out of that, we eventually even registered a small NGO, which ran for about 10 years. But in the end, it was just too much to combine with everything else. But in that time, we were able to support quite a few, probably about 100 children, support their educational needs so that they could make the transition to formal school. So, I mean, it's quite a daunting prospect to actually establish an organization. But I mean, there are other ways one can do it. I mean, I've actually taught literacy to people who have worked for me before, and I've also hired a teacher before to teach somebody who was working for me how to read and write. And it's not that hard to teach somebody the alphabet and basic literacy, and from them they might be able to take some classes or something. But as educated people, we are also potentially teachers of literacy, and so we can even teach literacy ourselves, and we can hire teachers for people, find educational opportunities for people. I think education is probably the most effective thing that you can give as somebody who's concerned about closing that disparity, because education makes a person capable of fending for themselves afterwards, or perhaps of earning money or earning a salary in a way that they couldn't have before, taking them perhaps into a higher income bracket than they would have had, than they were before. So I think education is probably the most sustainable gift that one can give if one wants to help. Yes.
And people at various levels of society can all do their bit, I suppose, in this.
They can all do their bits, and certainly those who have a voice can also speak about it and lobby for it, because at the end of the day, if as a country we want to improve this picture, then something has to be done at national level to improve educational standards. And so if people are able to to add their voices, or in whatever way, even write about it, like I've done, start debates about it, and bring attention to the fact that we need to do more to educate our population, especially our female population. That counts for something too.
So what advice, I'm flipping the coin here, would you give to people not born in privileged circumstances and their parents and communities in terms of helping themselves and development?
I would say, again, prioritize education. Put your efforts into getting an education. And the School for Life began its work I think in the 90s, either late 80s or early 90s in northern Ghana. And the model that they rolled out, which is a 9-month program of literacy and numeracy in the mother tongue, has been taken up very widely by many other NGOs and bilateral development partners and multilaterals. It's been rolled out over the country, and it's also now been made into a national government policy, and the government is together with some support from some of the development partners implementing it themselves. And therefore, I think there are more opportunities now than ever before for children all over the country to be able to begin an education that way, because complementary basic education is designed for children at different ages. You don't have to be the age to go into class 1. You can be older than that. I think it's in principle between 8 and 14, but I don't know, some of the other programs may take older children, and moreover, often in rural areas, people are not 100% sure of their ages anyway. So I think there are opportunities, and I'd say prioritize education more than anything else, because that will then make other things happen. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Mamle. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise.
Amazing. Very much, I think a lot of people, there's been a lot of sort of gems and follow-up items from this, particularly, I think, just understanding the concepts of the book, and also see that there's lots of NGOs implementing some of these educational programs that hopefully people can also support. If people can't do it themselves, they can say, okay, if there's School of Life for Life and other similar NGOs, then maybe I can support them, because to reinvent the wheel, people are already on the ground doing this. then others can support them, and that goes
Absolutely.
I know there's
Yes.
quite a few NGOs looking after and trying to support the Kayo girls, in different
Yes, there are.
areas.
Certainly, yeah. There's quite a lot of that going on. Yes,
I know there's quite a lot of people trying to make them stay in their hometowns, in their villages, and then provide opportunities for training and vocational training and education there, so they don't have the need to go down and
absolutely
suffer the consequences of what a big urban sprawl has,
Absolutely, because they're exposed to so many dangers when they come down like that. And I mean, it's a children's book. I could have written a very different book if it were for adults. I mean, there are so many dangers, for young girls just coming down like that, migrating themselves. And so certainly initiatives like that give them options where they are great. And I didn't talk much about vocational training, but I think that's also extremely valuable. Vocational training and apprenticeships. These are also things that can be extremely helpful to young girls like that, not just girls, to all children who are struggling for educational opportunities, because it's about skills acquisition. It doesn't have to be always about formal education and O levels and all that, and what are they called these days? Yeah. So I think any form of education that gives people the chance to learn trades and develop skills that they can use to support themselves is extremely valuable, and that is what should be aspired to. That all children should have the right to have education of some form, to have a range of options for their futures.
Yeah. I mean, just one quick point. My understanding is that they come down to the cities to actually save money, but I question whether they even do save money, because I understand that they pay for absolutely everything. Sleeping areas paid for.
Sleeping.
You see, paid for. Having a shower is paid for. Every movement, every human need, they pay for.
Exactly.
How much are they even earning with the tips the customers are giving them?
Well, exactly. I don't think it's an easy option at all, and so it would be wonderful, really, if girls could find other options so that this phenomenon wouldn't be there anymore. I really think it would be great for the Kayo phenomenon to die out, because girls don't need to do that type of migration for unskilled labor anymore. Yes, I think that would be the best case scenario.
Yes. Mamle Wolo, thank you so much, and we very much look forward to having you to discuss your next book. And thank you so much.
For sure.
Having you. It's been a real pleasure.
I have to. Thank you so much for giving me this platform, and I've really enjoyed the discussion.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right then. Bye.